Hello. Today I'd like to make a meditation on prudence by using some of the passages from Baltasar Gracian book. And I'm going to read these passages and analyze them in details. So the book, actually, what's the name of the book? The Art of Worldly Wisdom. So in this book, this is how I work with some concepts, which I'm taking for discussions at the speaking club. So I type the word here, and there are so many references to this word. This word is found on many pages, and I simply just go and check these passages and analyze them to understand better prudence. Of course, I might go just in, for example, Goodreads, right? Prudence quotes. So another way of finding some information which I use to prepare for conversations is going on the site Goodreads and finding some quotes. But unfortunately, there were very little quotes on prudence by authors which I could take seriously. And so I didn't took quotes from there. I use one of my favorite books. Well, actually, it's not true. It's not my favorite book, but I enjoy reading this book. I read it in Russian. And I remember I found this guy, Baltasar Gracian, after reading Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer praised him a lot. And well, I wouldn't say that I agree with everything that Baltasar Gracian says. And in many cases, he is too overwhelmed by his reputation, by his social status, that some of his passages are utterly foolish, but others are very smart. And yeah, it's like, for me, it's kind of mixture of foolishness and wisdom. And so I'm going to read these few passages, 46, 47, probably 50, and just talk a little bit about it. So the first one: temper your antipathy. We hate some people instinctively, even before we are aware of their good qualities. And sometimes this vulgar, natural aversion is directed towards the eminent. Let prudence keep it in check. There is nothing more demeaning than to abhor the best people. It is as excellent to get along with heroes as it is disgraceful to treat them with antipathy. So prudence here used to prevent judgment, which we make harshly when we meet new people, or when we, it shouldn't be necessarily new people, but mostly it's our natural, perhaps my natural instinct to treat people immediately after you meet them. And especially on YouTube, on the internet, it's a very frequent case. I go on YouTube, watch some videos, and after a few seconds, maybe not seconds, maybe after 20, 30 seconds, I make a judgment. I evaluate the person by looking at how he speaks, what language he uses, or he or she, what kind of ideas he tries to push forward. Probably I look for the intention of this, like intentionality of this person, like what is behind of what he's trying to say, like what motivates the person speak, whether he seeks fame, admiration, works or money. And often, yeah, for me, it is mostly intuitive. So when I watch new YouTube channels or look for new people, not only on YouTube, again, when I meet new people in the offline world, there's a natural tendency to make a judgment and to treat and to treat everybody like in a very superficial level. And prudence, yeah, like this advice is about to use prudence not to make a fast judgment, not to make a rush judgment, to think before you evaluate the person, before you form an opinion about the person. It probably makes sense to wait and analyze your perceptions and probably ask yourself if you really form an opinion, even if it's just a vague opinion like this is a nice person or this bad person, or basically I'd like to hang out with this person, or I don't like, I'd like to avoid hanging out with this person, or I'd like to listen to him or to her, or it's better to run away. So prudence here helps us to hold our judgment for for a long time. Maybe not a long time, but for enough time to to see the real person. Like sometimes we don't see a real person. Like we never see a real person. We always form our opinion about other people by our perception of them. It's like you can't go in somebody else's mind and then form an opinion. You basically make an opinion according to your perception. So it's always, you don't make an opinion about the person, you make an opinion about the person's representation in your consciousness. Okay, so in prudence, basically you don't make it so fast. Let's read it once again. So we hate some people instinctively, and this is important. So if we ask ourselves, I don't think hate here is a correct word, but basically it may be disgust, it may be fear, or it may be contempt, not just hate. Many negative emotions are coming instantly and instinctively as soon as we meet a new person and as soon as we interact with a new person, whether it's an interaction simply on the internet when we watch some videos, or whether it's a real communication in the world. Instinctively, and the same thing is about positive emotions. I guess it's also maybe considered, but this passage is about temper your antipathy. So if you have an antipathy first, like, you have to stop it and give a person another chance. Well, sometimes, of course, it may be wise advice. Sometimes it may be useless. For example, for me, I would say that in my personal experience, I rely on my intuition in terms of interacting with people in different situations quite heavily. Well, whenever I look on YouTube, so whenever I search for information, for ideas on YouTube, if I start listening a person talking about anything, in the first minute, I basically form an opinion about the person. And usually there are very few people whom I really can be interested in, since there are lots of channels I'm subscribed to, and there are so many people whom I'd like to listen on a daily basis. So if I simply watch all these people whom I found on the internet during the last 4 years, let's say, if I watch their videos, every new uploads, I wouldn't be able to do anything at all. I would have like 16 hours sitting and watching those people. And this is because I like a lot what I find on the internet, and it makes me addictive. But in the same time, I refused, or didn't refuse, I discovered so many silly men and women talking about different stuff, and I made different opinions. Okay, I see it. It just doesn't follow. Anyway, so the point is that on YouTube, it's just one type of perception. On YouTube, probably, or on the internet, when it's not a real conversation, where it's not a real interaction, it makes sense to trust your antipathy. So if we instinctively don't like a person, it makes sense to just let them go and find another person and look for better, whatever, for other people, since there are like countless people on YouTube, and our preferences sometimes may be based on both. So we try look for people whom we like, and we try to avoid people whom we didn't like. And again, antipathy may be formed in a way when it contradicts our beliefs. For example, there is somebody who is very smart, very decent person who, let's say, studies his subject for decades, and we simply listen to what he says when we need the information which he possesses, and we disagree with what he says, and we like hate the person, and we don't go and search for information provided by this person. But yeah, I guess this is a foolish way of allowing your hate to basically control your perception, your attention, since oftentimes people who disagree with you are the most important people whom you have to pay attention. Since if you have certain beliefs, it's better to know not your beliefs, but the opposite beliefs, and to understand why people think in a different way rather than you think. Okay, so I would say that this is a sort of general wisdom, but it must be applied at every particular case differently. So if we simply follow the advice and say, okay, every time when we hate people instinctively, even before we are aware of their good qualities, if we give up on these people, if we don't pay attention to them, we are fools. But this book is an old one. It was written in 17th century, 1600s, and at that time it was the life was not the same as it is right now, but it may be of course applied to books and to different authors. It's not just people again whom we interact with. It also may be some books. You open a book, you start reading, you see that the author of the book is vague or silly or like jokes a lot, and we may form an opinion that this is not worth reading, but actually it may be exactly the opposite. It may be a very smart book at just the beginning. The author tried to conceal his wisdom by presenting himself as a stupid character. Or some people just start writing their books, and at the beginning they have very little idea of what they're writing about, but later on they discover something and they just get smarter and smarter. It's there's one passage, I don't remember its entire content, but the idea was that it was about prudence, that prudence gives its best at last, and genius gives its best at first. And this is interesting. So we see that when we meet new people, it's interesting to see how they interact. Like, what do they give to us? Like, do they present themselves as smart and wise and educated, and do they try to throw on us their best qualities, their best knowledge, their best ideas, their best selves, or they conceal it as long as possible. And at the beginning, it seems like you have a conversation, it may be boring and people don't open themselves. But the longer you proceed, the better you can see, and people become more and more open. And finally, you may discover something that, in like every person, you may basically look at each person as an entire world, as a castle, or as a gallery, or museum. And some people don't allow others to get in themselves. Like they just show them the the entrance. Don't don't allow them to keep to go deeper. Well, my language today is I can't find a suitable metaphor. But the idea again, for example, I may have lots of treasures, let's say in my soul, and I don't show it anybody, only after a long time of communicating and interacting. And other people, they do exactly the opposite. So they first show their best, their most valuable treasures, and then after a week or a month, there's nothing in them you can see. So you basically don't have anything. And some people are poor in terms of their personality, their psychology, their worldview. We may say their spirituality, but now I'm trying to avoid using these terms. So for me, everything is spiritual. It's actually linguistical or linguistic. So language and spirit. Now these terms are, no, I don't use spirit, since for me it makes very little sense, but I use language to describe spiritual people and intellectuals and wise people and people who care about their minds. So for me, language now, like language, basically you have a body, and people say like you have a body and you have a soul, or you have consciousness and body. So for me, basically we have bodies and we have language, and our linguistic body, it's also a body. And so we, like your richness, if you may be a small, short dwarf, but you may have extremely rich conceptual network, and your intelligence, your knowledge may be so huge. So in this case, you have a lot of what people call mind, spirituality, consciousness, and whatever your body has, like your whatever arms and legs and your head and your dick or teeth, it's not here as important in terms of spirituality. Again, people say, oh, like spiritual work. What is spiritual work? Basically linguistic work. So when I understood that, it probably revolutionized my entire worldview. When I figured out that really what I'm doing is like I'm working on language, but what is language? It's actually my mind. So what is spiritual work? It's the work on my language, on my ability to describe what I see, what I hear, what I perceive by my senses. And it's not also perception, but it's also conceptual blending. I mean, you take ideas from different frames, you blend them together, you learn to describe the world not in strict terms, but you use some metaphors. So basically, you just enrich your understanding of different frameworks, different conceptual fields. Anyway, so we hate some people instinctively even before we are aware of their good qualities. And sometimes this vulgar natural aversion is directed towards the eminent. So the point is that when our hate is directed toward the eminent, we may become, we may overlook the possibility to discover, let's say, heroes and great men, simply because at first our aversion, right, and our vulgar natural aversion misguided us, presenting these people, these heroes, as whatever, fools, stupid people, weak people, some morons, imbeciles, idiots, etc. And so it makes sense to use prudence, and not trust to your first impression. In important situations, of course, when we search for videos on YouTube, when we want to understand some ideas, it's much better to immediately reject some people without listening to them. Since if you have to listen everybody for, let's say, just 1 minute, it's sometimes you lose basically so much time. Let's say now I'd like to analyze the idea of prudence and find some people who talk about prudence. I may go, for example, I may show you like how it works on the internet. So prudence, I just type the word, and there are 442 videos on prudence, and people. It doesn't mean that each of these videos is dedicated to prudence, but when somebody says prudence, perhaps he or she means something, and it makes sense to listen to what they're saying. And to find information, you basically may enjoy the person, or you may just say, oh, that's just nonsense. But anyway.
Keeping inflation low rewards prudence. It helps long-term planning because you can know what your money.
Well, I already know this channel, the School of Life, and I don't pay attention to anything they say, since for me it's kind of superficial. And I simply skip. Perhaps there are some wise ideas, but whatever I already know, whatever I've formed my opinion once, I may recheck it if it's necessary, but now it's not necessary, and I will skip it and search for other videos. Where's the next one? Okay, here.
And I think that's led to partisanship. And I think the third thing.
Well, I usually don't listen to politics, and so I wouldn't pay attention to this girl as well. So I skip forward.
I'm not without prudence. And that a moment's negligence can lead to the dissolution of happiness in a lifetime. Take care with each step and do nothing in haste. And from the beginning, think what may be in the end.
So basically, well, here we find an example, right? So I would try to listen to this guy for like 5, 10, 15 minutes. If I need the information on prudence, I see he tries to persuade you to, keep to the end, whatever he says. I like the way how he uses his language. I like the way how he speaks. And once again, if I need to find information on prudence, I would probably check and watch him like for I don't know for how long. Let's see how.
I think I found the most portals to discovery for myself personally. Everest has been in the news quite a bit recently, chiefly because of a huge, devastating avalanche that took place last April, where a number of Nepalese climbers, predominantly from the Sherpa ethnic group, were killed in support of Western mountaineers. Of course, mountaineering is, certainly by some people's view, almost an indulgent type of a sport. We're not going to.
Okay, he talks about climbing Everest, and probably he'll show off and say how he climbed it, and it's not about prudence, obviously, and I wouldn't listen. It's enough for me, since now if I'm looking for the information related to prudence, I want to see people talking exactly about, about prudence. And even though this guy may be an interesting guy and tell lots of amazing things about climbing mountains, it's not what I'm really looking for. So once again, like I go forward, like listen to this guy.
Justice, prudence, courage, and temperance.
Justice, prudence, courage, and temperance. Julius Rambaud's program on Jewish and Israel law inaugural event.
All of which are mentioned in the passages that Daniel read to us, although slightly different translation: justice, moderation, endurance, and then harmony. Thus, to say that the translation of Torah as nomos enabled a broadening of the term nomos beyond the narrowness.
Well, he basically reads from her notes, and I don't like to listen to people who read from their notes. That's why I wouldn't listen to her. And again, it's probably not about prudence, it's more about law, even though she mentioned like virtues, for cardinal virtues. But anyway, so you got the idea. So when I search, for example, information on YouTube or on the internet, I form my judgments and I evaluate people very quickly. I don't spend a lot of time. But if I find somebody who I can relate to, I may just watch for hours and days and weeks and months. For example, recently, 3 months ago, a little bit longer than that, I discovered John Searle. And John Searle, he's an American philosopher. He studied philosophy for 50 years, and his views are almost exactly the opposite views to those which I have on philosophy, on on the world, on consciousness. But I liked him. I like his way of speaking, his examples which he uses, his sense of humor. I like he's not a deep thinker. He's obviously superficial, but even though there are some disagreements, I still like to listen to his lectures, and I've already listened like 56 lectures. It's 2 courses on philosophy of language and philosophy of mind, and now I'm listening to the courses of lecture on philosophy of society. And as a person, I would say that I don't like John Searle. Like as a person, he probably I wouldn't hang out with him, but I like to listen how he speaks and what he says. And it's important for me, since again it's exactly the opposite to what I'm thinking and what I am saying and what I believe in, let's say. And he has amazing concepts. So the content of his lectures and his books, I've also read 2 books already. Now I'm reading the 3rd book on intentionality. The content which he presents is insightful. It's rich in terms of metaphors and understanding. There are of course some some language, especially in his books, where he's quite tiresome. So it's not like reading Nietzsche. It's more of like reading Kant. But still, I like the impact which he makes on my understanding, on my perception of the world, and my understanding of the language. And I like the influence, not just the information, but I like how I feel, and I like to think about certain ideas which he talks about in his lectures afterwards. Sometimes I watch lectures by very smart guys, and I'm very excited to listen to what they say, but as soon as they stop talking, I shift to something else and think about something else and never come back to analyze the information which I actually heard. Of course, I may convince myself that I understand everything and that it makes no sense to think about it on my own. What's the point? But when I listen to John Searle, for example, I noticed that after I listen to his lectures, I may go for a walk, and then I may discover myself thinking about certain concepts which John Searle outlined, and I really like it. I like to, think naturally about something that I hear without forcing myself to think about it. Of course, in terms of, if I need to study it, if I need to really deeply understand what he talks about and analyze all these concepts, I can do that forcefully. I can force myself to do this type of thinking, but it wouldn't feel as well as when I just find myself thinking about something naturally, about something that I heard from somebody else's lectures. But anyway, okay, it's too long. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't go further, since my intention was to talk about several passages, but I stopped on one and tried to analyze it in more depth. So I tried to figure out how I can not just how I understand it, but how can I apply it in my personal experience. And I try probably to, encourage you to pay attention to it as well. Let's read it once again and see some phrases and some metaphors. So we hear some people instinctively, even before we are aware of their good qualities. And sometimes this vulgar natural aversion. Yeah, I like this expression. Vulgar natural aversion is directed towards the eminent. Eminent, I guess it's a rare word. It describes somebody who is popular and basically a good person. Eminent. So natural aversion is directed towards the eminent. Vulgar natural aversion. Let prudence keep it in check. So keep it in check basically means that whenever we make a judgment, and it's not actually about watching some YouTube videos, but mostly about interacting with people in life. So you meet somebody, you have a conversation, or you simply listen to a person, attend some lectures or whatever. Like if you feel that this person is kind of if you feel vulgar natural aversion, and if you can't explain to yourself why do you feel it, it makes sense to use your prudence and analyze this aversion, analyze your judgment, how you evaluate the person. So let's suppose you go to the speaking club and you see me, and you meet me the first time, and we have a conversation. And somehow, maybe you didn't like my beard, or maybe you didn't like the way how I speak, or maybe you didn't like the way how I present myself. You may make a certain evaluative judgment. You may say, oh, this man, like I don't like to be in a company of this man, so I don't like to attend his meetings. It makes no sense. I'd better go and watch some videos or have conversations on the internet or do something else. But here, I'd like you to think about this aversion, this perception, and ask yourself why exactly you don't like the person. Well, in this case, why don't you like me? Like, what makes you think that I'm not the person with whom you'd like to communicate? And then, of course, if you have good reasons for that, if you may say, okay, this is like my intention, like, why did you come to the speaking club? You could probably come to learn language. And usually this is the most popular motivation. So we come here to learn language and to practice language, to learn to speak. And if you came to learn to speak, it doesn't actually matter whether you talk to people like whom you like or dislike. Your goal is to find somebody who can speak well and learn from them. Or your goal is to speak as much as possible. And again, if you have if you know how to speak, probably you have this you may go and speak at the speaking club, since in our club, if you can speak well, I usually allow people who speak well talk as much as they want. Sometimes, of course, if they go off the rails, I stop them there, since there are many people, not just one or two people. But anyway, so the point is, like, if you have reasons which aren't related to your intention, so you came there to learn speaking club, to learn to speak, and you didn't like my beard, let's say, and you think, oh, this bearded man, I don't like to, to attend this speaking club simply because of his beard. It's irrational, and you may check, like, you may use your prudence and ask once again, like, does it make any sense to hate somebody who has a big beard and miss the opportunity to study language, or it's better to reevaluate your first impression. Anyway, yeah, there's nothing more demeaning than to abhor the best people. Yeah, and obviously I'm the best person here who studies language, right? So you may see, it's not about my speaking club. It's not about my experience, which I actually have more experience than anybody in this city who conducts speaking clubs. Probably, I can't say exactly, but I don't know any other speaking club in our city where somebody was really passionate about what they are doing and had the same success. But it's not about, again, it's not about the speaking club. Look, like, in my estimation, I am the best among those who study language, simply because I do it 90% of the time for, I don't know, it's not, I can't calculate it. But for the last 4 years, it basically was my chief motivation, and I sacrificed almost everything for that. And I'm doing it with great passion. I enjoy studying language. And now I've got so far that I couldn't even imagine something like that before. I couldn't have imagined something like that before I got there. In 2017, I didn't think that I'll be able to understand language in such depth and get there. So I was thinking, well, maybe I'll learn to understand native speakers and to speak a little bit about myself and about whatever I'm doing. And I didn't think that I'll shift, like, especially in 2016. I didn't think that I'll shift my thinking to English and will learn how to speak English well, and will abandon my mother tongue for the sake of English, since there's almost nothing to improve in my Russian language, or at least it takes so much time. Whereas in English, there's an improvement on a weekly basis and a monthly basis, and I can see it, and I really like it. Anyway, so abhor the best people, right? So there's nothing more demeaning than to abhor the best people. I would say that in my personal experiences, it's probably the case. So actually, I treat people, and I'm aware of that, I treat people very low. Of course, on a superficial level, when there these conversations or communications, they do not matter, I may just show indifference or sometimes even sympathy. But in terms of real connection, so I guess I treat people lower than they deserve. This is my kind of intuitive way of evaluating, like, basically choosing my own environment, since I don't know anybody whom I would treat like as a role model, for example. And it refers not only to the people whom I communicate with, but to the entire internet. So on the internet, I know nobody who I would say, oh, this is the person I'd like to be. But there are a few people who I'm trying to imitate in some sense, and whom I wouldn't. Like, today I thought about it. So it's you may say that you really love a person, or for the sake of argument, like a person, if you don't like to change them. So you accept them as they are, and you not just accept them as they are, you're so mesmerized by who they are and how they manifest themselves in the world and what they are doing, and like in almost in everything, that you would say, oh, like let's suppose this is some girl, and she is just manifestation of all all virtues. And yet, if I imagine that I have a relationship with this girl, probably there will be something that I would like to change. So probably I would change, like maybe, like if I had a if I had a chance, I would change the way she speaks, or the way she walks, or the way she dresses, or the way she thinks, or the way she uses her language. And probably I'll force her to develop certain habits and get rid of other habits. And it's not like the perfect love or likeness. But perfect love, you basically see the person and say, oh, this is whom I'd like to be, and this is like, I wouldn't change it if I had enough, if I have anything. It's just basically like a perfect person, like an ideal, right? And yeah, that's what I'm saying, that I never, like, I don't see anybody whom I'd like to consider as an ideal, neither on YouTube, not in real life, and myself as well. So it's not just, I always see that, oh, this type of me, this this, not type, but this version of me in the present, it has so much features to work on. So there are definitely language, definitely strength, self-understanding, understanding of the world, certain habits. Well, the list is infinite. I always may find something that I would like to change. Anyway, so again, it's so I like to be like, on one side, I want to be free. When I speak, I want to feel free, and this is one of the most important things I'm working on. Of course, there are other things, like I'm working on my grammar, I'm working on my pronunciation, I'm trying to get rid of fillers, I'm trying to integrate new knowledge and experience in these talks. I'm developing my sense of humor, even though it may be implicit, but still it's a part of my motivation. So I'm working on my consistency and develop my attention span, learn to speak for a long time, interestingly, fascinatingly, convincingly, persuasively about a particular topic and idea. Even though I'm very far from reaching this perfection, but still this is a part of my intentionality. I learned to improvise. I don't like to take some, for example, in this case, most of what I'm saying here, it's an improvisation, and I'm learned to improvise, just taking one quote and talk about it as long as possible without being, too judgmental. Make laugh, laugh mean like laugh in terms of humor, not laugh. In English, they sound the same. That's so strange. Laugh. Yeah, usually when I take some quotes for discussing them at the conversations, I've noticed that 90% of the time people can't say anything about a quote, especially a long one. Like, you give them a few sentences, they interpret them, basically rephrasing what is said in the sentence, and then there's no way to develop further conversation. And as you can see in my case, I may just talk about it infinitely. There may be a question, is there any value in these talks? Well, for me, there certainly is. Maybe it's not for other people, but I enjoy doing that. And definitely I'm working on my speaking skills and all, other skills which I stated before. But anyway, so now, of course, now, like, this temper your antipathy. So basically I've already analyzed it. And now I may think about it for, for a week, just practicing what I have learned from this one passage, this quote. So I may look at people every time, like new people, even not new people, but those whom I interact on a regular basis at my speaking club. And well, obviously on YouTube, and see how it affects me. So there's prudence. So what is prudence? If I evaluate a person low and say this is a bad person, or think, or try to shut them off if it's in the case of YouTube videos. So I have to ask the question, like, why do I not like this person? What makes me treat him in this way? And then if there are good reasons, that's cool. But if it's just instinctively, if it's vulgar, natural aversion, I probably may reevaluate my first impression. Anyway, so that was it, and I guess it's enough today. I'd like to, if you watch this video and want to come to the speaking club, which is going to take place in 4 hours, in 3 hours and 40 minutes. So we are going to talk about prudence, and I already prepared some passages from this book. So we are going to discuss 47, different direction, 47, 50th, 52nd, and 54th passage on prudence. Yeah, like four. I wrote them down on papers like that, and we'll not probably talk about them as long as I talked about this first one here. But nevertheless, I guess it may be worth talking about it. Anyway, so that's all. See you next time.